Blue turned out a little weird. That's okay. Hello. My name is Mike. I'm a geographer and a mapper, much like the rest of us here. I'm going to talk to you guys about QGIS. QGIS is an open source desktop mapping platform. So largely to this point, we've been introducing, or I guess I should say, teasing web mapping. At this point, we're going to bring it back to the desktop a little bit. And I'll get into, I guess I can, there's a couple of reasons you would want to use, some desktop software while you're creating web maps or while you're using web maps. The primary one I'm going to just focus on in this quick segment here is, so we have grabbed some restaurant data from the city of Lexington here. And using desktop software can be very powerful in that it allows for the GIS analysis and analytical processes that might not be available on web mapping platforms. When you're working with data sets, you often want to work with derivatives of those data sets, or aggregate those data sets in some way, shape, or form, or analyze those data sets in some way, shape, or form. And a lot of the current web mapping tools don't offer those in extremely robust fashion. So your desktop GIS software, such as ArcGIS and QGIS, still do play a role. QGIS is a free and open source GIS software. It is kind of probably the largest alternative to Esri software, ArcGIS software right now. And you can think of it as, not necessarily a complete replacement, but more or less a good complement. There are still some features that you'll find in one that you won't find in others, but they can be designed to work together decently well. QGIS is an official project of OSGeo, which is the Open Space Geospatial Consortium. And one of the major draws that if people here have used ArcGIS before, this will be something that might be of interest to you, is it runs on Linux, Unix, Mac OS, Windows, and they are working on a version that will actually run on Android. So you can run QGIS on a tablet, which I think is very cool. It's fully capable. It supports both vector and raster data in various shapes and forms. So some of the components of QGIS, there were some people out here that said they've used ArcGIS before. And if so, you can think of a lot of these next steps as if this exists in ArcGIS, there is some type of equivalent in QGIS. The first component and kind of the main one that you'll work with as you install on your computer is QGIS Desktop. This would be your equivalent to ArcMap. This would be where you would do your map composition, your data work, your analysis, your geoprocessing, and just your data exporting and saving. And yes, you can think of this as kind of analogous to ArcMap. There's a QGIS browser. So for those of you who have used ArcMap out there, this is your equivalent to ArcCatalog. This is kind of your data organizing component of QGIS. And here's where you can create files, save files, organize your data, create web services, and run some more, do a little bit more rich data management. There's QGIS Server, which this one's more directly analogous to ArcGIS Server. But QGIS Server is server software where you can serve feature services and map services up that can be delivered to mapping applications, web mapping applications. There's your web client, which would be what would sit on top of QGIS Server. This would be web facing. This is if you were to navigate to a website, this is what you would see. And this would be kind of the built up QGIS web client itself. This could be replaced by either leaflet or open layers, really. But this would just be kind of a bit more better integrated, perhaps, with the program. This would be analogous to some of the ArcGIS APIs that you would potentially see. So to your kind of quick background in QGIS, I believe it is on these computers, and if not, this is a place to download it. If you have it on your laptop, I would suggest against downloading it right now because it will take a little while. I'm happy to chat with you for a few minutes after our workshop. If you would like to download it, I can give you some points and some pointers. But if you do want to sign in and make a map, I encourage you to do it. But today, our ongoing theme has been restaurant inspections. And where we grab this, it's a little hard to see here, is the Lexington Open Data Site, which you guys may or may have not come across. But it is just a newly launched repository of data on Lexington that would be openly available for you to use. And if you're looking at making some local maps or have some fun local data sets, you can get that from here. Well, actually, I should correct myself. I think the restaurant inspection data came from the health department. But the supplemental data that I'm going to give you is from here. And the restaurant health inspection data is in other cities, stuff you could actually find on this open data site. So first, a little to get you started. If you do have QGIS open, great. You'll probably see something like this. If not, this is what you would likely see. And this is your main QGIS desktop interface. And this is your software that is analogous to ArcMap. So at first, when you fire this up, it looks a little intimidating. It looks a little crazy. But my goal for these next few slides is to kind of give you a little bit of the lay of the land and kind of show you a bit where some of the common tools and common functions that you'll use might be. So what is nice about QGIS, along with a lot of these other programs that we use, is a lot of the like tools and a lot of the common things you're going to use are grouped together. So you might fire it up and go, oh man, this looks really crazy and confusing. I don't want to learn this. That's possible that it will happen. It's happened to me for a very long time. But everything is generally linked together, grouped together. So, this you can refer back to this. I won't spend a lot of time on this just because it's kind of a lay of the land. But at the top here, you'll have your map and navigation tools. These would be your zoom in, zoom out, zoom to pan, zoom to extent. Your file toolbars will just be your save, open, new, kind of your file management functions. Here's something that actually is a little bit different and I think actually really nice is QGIS makes it really easy to manage layers and specifically with these tools right here, add layers to your map. They've got all these little nice icons here, but really what they do is just kind of front and center say, this is how you can get data in here. This top one will allow you to put vector data in, such as a shapefile. The second one here, the little grid, would be raster data, such as an orthophoto or an aerial image of Lexington. And here are this elephant-looking guy here. This would be a Postgres database or a PostGIS database. And you can see how you can connect to a whole bunch of different data sources that, and they make it really easy to do that. These two icons on the bottom here would actually be feature services, where you could stream a feature service from a website. Your attributes are accessed, and again, it might be arranged slightly differently, but you have your attribute toolbar, which allow you to access and select the various attributes of your data. Your layers panel, this is where you'll manage your layers, the order of your layers and the visibility of your layers and the accessibility of your layers. And our browser panel, this is kind of our little shortcut to QGIS browser, which is like our art catalog. If you ever lose a toolbar, no need to fear. You can just go to the view menu, toolbars, and they'll all be available to you. What I have thrown together for you guys is a zip package of data. And in this data set, there's some Lexington census tracts and that restaurant's shapefile that we had been talking about earlier. And then a whole bunch of other supplemental data, such as the street center lines, some area water lines, water bodies, Grab traffic lights, because that was just kind of fun. And again, these are all just from the open data Lexington site, with the exception of those restaurants, which were from the health department. So adding data, what is supported? One of the really nice things, I think, with QGIS is it actually will support it will readily support a whole bunch of different kinds of data sets. I've given you links here because they were way too much to actually list. But when you're working with QGIS, you'll notice that there are some file types in here that you will recognize quite quickly. For example, Esri shapefile, you guys have worked with those. QGIS will read those in readily. The reason I didn't list them, you can see here, is this is a very large list, which is pretty cool. But yeah, generally if it's a vector GIS formatted file, there is some way, either directly or through some method, to get it into QGIS. Your raster formats as well are all listed here, and here's where you'll find your TIFFs, your JPEGs, MB tiles, that'd be Mapbox tiles if you've created any Mapbox tile services. You can add PostGIS layers, some database layers, PostGIS, Oracle Spatial, Spatialite. And one of the nice tools that we have here in QGIS is a very easy ability to add tabular data. And if you go back to our little Add Data tab, our tabular data is just this little comma right here for adding a comma-separated file or tab-separated file. All right, so point out a couple of key differences if you've used ArcGIS that might trip you up if you use QGIS for the first time. This is based on my first experience firing up QGIS a couple years ago now. Projections. Projections are handled a little bit differently in QGIS than they are in ArcGIS. This is fairly similar as far as when you're working with projections. It will default to the projection set in your project, which should default to the first layer that you add to your map. You can set layers on an individual basis, which based on your shapefile. But the project on the whole you can set so it will attempt to do an on-the-fly. One of the tricks is QGIS does not automatically enable on-the-fly projecting. You have to go tell it to. And on-the-fly projecting is basically just the program doing you a favor in trying to project a data set so you can see it overlaid correctly, even if it might not be in the proper projection. Reprojecting a data set. This is going to kind of come back to that WGS stuff that we were just talking about. There actually is no explicit projection tool or reproject tool. If you're looking to reproject, you have to save a copy of your file by right-clicking on your layer and going to Save As, and you'll see a dialog that will pop up that will allow you to set the projection that you would like to be working with, and it will run through the transformations going through the save. This is actually kind of nice, I think, and a little bit more intuitive than some of the other methods that will reproject, in that it forces you to essentially to save a copy. You can't wreck a file by reprojecting it and having it get all screwed up, but it is a little different. And here is what I was mentioning with that enable on the fly. If you right-click on any of the layers in your GIS file, you can access the project, or I guess this is the project properties, not the specific layer. Excuse me. If you go to project properties, you can set the various coordinate reference systems in your file. And this was just a blank file I fired up, and doesn't have enable on the fly selected, actually. So basically it'll mean that will just say if your files are not in the same projection, it's not going to do anything to try to help you fix that or do it or show them in the right location. So I recommend one of the first things you do whenever you fire up QGIS is go enable that, because it can make it a lot easier. This was digging, with those files that I gave you, plotting those Lexington restaurants or the restaurant inspections on the map. This is where you will land. Symbolizing your file can be found in the layer properties. You have a whole bunch of different ways you can symbolize. You symbolize in the style tab. Here you can, you determine whether your data is nominal, ratio, whatever it might be, and start to set up your categories or your graduated scales. And this is just a quick shot at some of the, some of the ways you can work with your layers. Joining is also something that might be a little bit new. You take care of that in your layer properties. And that would be, I guess, with the files that I gave you, you can add your CSV and then join it to some of the restaurant points. Geoprocessing, and this is actually the really big thing I wanted to talk about with, in context or in comparison with web mapping. This is why you would use QGIS in the web mapping process, to run some of the analytical tools and some of the geoprocessing tools that aren't readily available in web-facing interfaces and web-facing data visualization tools. So your geoprocessing is actually just located pretty simply in your top menu. You're going to see a vector drop-down that will have a lot of the different functions and tools and tasks that you can run on vector software, and you're going to have raster directly next to that. And you can see one of the things I would encourage you guys to try when you're working with this restaurant data would be to try a points and polygon. This would be like a spatial join. And we can see how many different restaurants are in each census tract. I looked hard for Lexington neighborhood file, but could not find one. So we're going to use census tracts as a proxy. But you can see there's a whole bunch of different things in here that, like your buffer, your intersects, your unions, they're all located in your geoprocessing tools here. Again, exporting data sets, and this is where you would be doing the reprojecting, if so. Once you get your restaurant file in and you have your any of the work that you've done, some aggregation or any processing, you can save your files, save your files out to your working directories. All right, so here is kind of a different concept. For those of you who have worked in ArcGIS, this is actually something that trips up a lot of people. In ArcGIS, you have your data view and your layout view. What would be analogous to that here is you have your general QGIS desktop, which looks like this, and then you open up a completely separate little piece of QGIS called the Print Composer. The Print Composer is where you set up your page layout. You can add legends, add scale bars, add inset maps, all the various map finishing features, the elements that you would want. The Print Composer is a little confusing when you first fire it up, but it gives you a piece of paper, and what you really need to do is using your element toolbars, add the different pieces to your composition, and you can move them around and change them as you go. So you can think of this as sort of a modified version of InDesign, perhaps, Illustrator, perhaps, but you're going to lay out your page in here. Here, you can add like I said, your maps, legend, scale, north arrow. What is nice is you can actually, after you create your Print Composer, you can save your Print Composer, and then if you go back into just your regular QGIS desktop, if you do update some of your data, if you click Update in your Print Composer, it will update that dynamically. Again, the layout process can just be detailed a little bit here. This is where you would add your north arrows, which I don't actually have on here, but your scale bar, your legends. And I believe in this little composition tab right here, if you do change something, you can update, or I guess if auto update is selected, it will. If you go back into QGIS and modify data, it will update as well. So when satisfied, you can export. Pretty simple concept right there. So some other QGIS features. This was designed just to introduce some of the real beginning, get you used to it a little bit. Some of the other QGIS features that we're not really going to touch on, but have been hinted towards a few times. You can create map services. These map services, would be your feature services that you could click on in a web map and see information. There's QGIS server, which is very much related to that, and same with web publishing. You can publish out these services. There is a Python library for QGIS. I think it's PyQGIS, which you can use to automate tasks and use it in a similar manner as you would ArcPy if you're working with ArcGIS. And we have our database connections as well that I've talked about. So before I wrap up here, I'm going to introduce to you one of the neatest features, I think, of QGIS, and that's called the plugin. QGIS is developed and managed and maintained by a large community of developers. And given that it's an open source project, there are a number of people out there that will create plugins or create new features that you can then tie into QGIS. And here is where you would find, I guess if you just go take a quick look at it, you'll see a lot of really kind of neat things here. Here, would be a plugin that would help you create a heat map, where someone has kind of written a script or written a tool that will read in your data and output a heat map. You've also got a time manager, which allows you to enable temporal data. This can be cool if you're creating an animation. Say, for example, if we wanted to show the restaurants by the dates they opened or were inspected in Lexington, we could create a little map that would pop a dot on the map every time that happens. One of the layers, if you're just starting with QGIS, I will encourage you to go, or not layers, one of the plugins I will encourage you to go get right away is this Open Layers plugin. This Open Layers plugin is really nice in that it allows you to use Google Maps or OpenStreetMap or Bing Maps or a whole bunch of different map layers as a background for your map document, your QGIS document. So yeah,